everybody. Welcome to Opus Underground here in Salem. And I am James Maroney. I'm honored to be here for the book launch of OMG by Jenny. Jenny has a new book out, and she's asked me to kind of turn the tables a little bit today and interview her about her book. And maybe we'll get to know her a little bit better, because normally she's asking all of the questions, right, Jenny?
That's right.
So let's get started a little bit here. We're going to have a reading, we're going to show a video, and then we're going to find a little bit more about Jenny. It's OMG, and of course it's by Jenny. It's your third novel.
It is.
How did you come up with this idea? It's actually a very, I haven't read the whole book because I want to savor it a little bit. I don't want to give too much away, but it's about a character who works at a startup company, and maybe you can just give us a little kind of background on how the book came about and what it's about.
Sure. I used to live in Kendall Square, and I lived across from a coffee shop called Voltage, and all of the programmers and the VCs used to hang out there, and you could just see the deals going on. And,
What are the VCs, out of curiosity?
Venture capitalists.
Okay.
And people banging out code, and the walls were totally stark and white, and so I just started observing some of the people, and I also had a startup at that time myself, and so I'd go in there for meetings, and so I was part of that world, although I wasn't a programmer. I used to be a web designer, and the startup that I had was it was called Crowd Publisher, and it was to help people crowdfund and publish their books all in one place, until I found out that authors are introverts and don't really like doing crowdfunding very much. So that was an ill-conceived idea. So anyway, but I learned a lot and decided that I started writing a short story about it, and I called it Jolt. And it was about this woman that I made up. She was a recent Harvard MBA, and she didn't want to get a real job. And she invented a hacking program, which she called OMG. And it's basically like a Ouija board with massive spying fingers that would help people make decisions about their lives. And so...
Let's stop for 1 second. So for those that don't know, OMG stands for Oh My God. That's kind of tech talk, kind of?
It's just millennial talk, but anyway.
Millennial talk. And actually, so it is about a millennial, which is interesting. You and I are not millennials.
Right.
I know we look great for our age, but the thing is...
In my head.
Is how I believe the character Kylie is perhaps part of your alter ego in some ways. Am I correct on that?
My alter ego is definitely a millennial, except that I do return phone calls.
That's awesome. So can we just, before we do the reading, talk a little bit about your main character, please?
Yes. Kylie is spunky. She... you know what? I don't want to give too much away.
Then don't give too much away.
Can I maybe show the video?
Why don't we do that?
And do a little reading, and then we'll talk about it a little more.
That sounds perfect. So that was a nice tease to OMG by Jenny. And now Jenny is going to read.
Right, I'm going to read you the prologue, which is very short, and then I want to just give you a little hint about the story. And you already have sort of a sense of it, but it is a thriller, and the prologue starts before the book takes place. And here we go. There was nothing that anyone could have done. Natalie's co-workers looked over their cubicles with shocked faces as the EMTs gave up on reviving her. They covered her with a sheet and wheeled her onto the elevator and out the door. Her team came into the common area and stood as quietly as trees in a forest, with only soft whispers about the hideousness of what had occurred, shuddering between them like the wind. My God, did you see what she looked like? They looked at each other helplessly, and then they were sent home while the area was disinfected. The ambulance drove silently from Physiozyme's prime Kendall Square location and over the river from Cambridge into Boston, where Natalie was taken to Mass General Hospital. It had been an hour before when Natalie had returned from her weekly lunch with Jerry Fox. She'd started feeling odd and was just a few minutes after that she sat down at her desk, but dismissed it, thinking that she might be queasy from something she'd eaten or was coming down with a virus. Natalie had popped 2 Tums in her mouth from her top drawer and opened a spreadsheet on her computer. As she waited for her stomach to settle, her skin began to tingle, as if her nerve endings were on fire. Then a nasty rash erupted on her arms and her face. She touched her burning cheeks and was horrified at the new landscape of bumpy peaks and valleys that had formed on her perfect skin. She could feel her veins delivering acid through her body, and her skin felt like it was melting from the inside. She tried to focus on her computer, but the screen danced in circles in front of her eyes. She watched her symptoms develop with a weird fascination. Had she been poisoned? Natalie knew that her colleagues called her a bitch behind her back. She also knew what she was getting into when she took the job as the only woman manager at Physiozyme, and figured that this came with the territory. But being poisoned was something else entirely. Why would anyone want to get rid of her? As far as she knew, her only fault at work had been her enviable success. She was a prized member of the executive team and very good at what she did. Natalie didn't think that her colleagues were bad guys, just clueless. Her stomach lurched off the rails in vile contractions, guiding her quinoa and kale salad towards making an encore. Of course, there was Jerry's wife who might want her dead, but Natalie doubted if she knew the extent of her relationship with Jerry. Of course, there was a team of wild programmers that she managed, all male except for poor Bettina, the interface designer. Bettina was the butt of their jokes when they thought that she was out of earshot. This week's brand was a running competition to compare the size of Bettina's brain to her breasts. There was no good outcome for Bettina in these jokes, since the consensus was that both were too small. Those morons were also clueless, but in a different way. She'd already fired one of them, Simon Whitehead. He was the only one who was just a shade more off-kilter and was just strange enough to try something so diabolical, but he'd been marched out of the building 5 weeks ago and had no access. The rest of them were jerks, but probably harmless. Natalie had been a stickler for detail, but who would want her dead? She considered it ironic that she thought of her workplace as toxic. After all, Physiozyme was a biotech company that specialized in antidepressants. Wasn't the whole point of the medicines they produced to make people feel better? There was only one person who bothered to talk to Natalie at all. It was Jerry Fox, one of the board members, and he appeared to be very pleased with Natalie's performance. She speed dialed Jerry Fox. "It's me," she told his voicemail. "I'm feeling sick. And at first I thought it might be something that we ate at lunch. Do you feel bad too? It could be food poisoning, but this is very strange. I'm trying not to panic. I've been poisoned. Can you help, Jerry? Where the hell are you?" Natalie stood up. feeling woozy and nearly passed out as she ran to the ladies' room. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror. Her dark, frightened eyes looked ghoulish against her white skin. The blotchy rash that she'd sprouted on her arms was now on her cheeks, and she had erupted into tiny blisters. Bettina's scream upon finding Natalie in the ladies' room minutes later set off initial pandemonium. The ambulance only took moments to whoop its way to the front door of the Kendall Square headquarters of Physiozyme, and then Natalie was gone. Steve Hahn, one of the head programmers on Natalie's team, stepped outside onto Main Street and took his phone and called Jerry Fox. No one picked up. "Hey, it's Steve Hahn. Sorry to tell you this. I thought you might want to know that Natalie is dead. Call me."
The prologue to OMG.
Yeah. So that is how it all began, but Kylie didn't know any of that, and she goes to Jolt, the coffee shop that I named after Voltage, and started writing her business plan that she was going to save herself with. And while she's doing this, a programmer, a hacker, picks it up over the Wi-Fi and approaches her table. His name is Simon Whitehead, and says, "Hey, I like what you're doing. You want to talk about it?" And sits down, and Kylie needs a hacker because that's what she's doing. And so she winds up hiring him, and that leads her down a rabbit hole of all kinds of problems. And they discover a biological weapon that's going to be released in Boston, and there's all sorts of twists and turns in the story. So that's basically it. James is going to maybe talk with me a little bit about it, and then I'm happy to answer some questions. And
Well, I like the way you open up. You're intrigued to continue reading the book, first of all. You can't put it down. When I started reading it, I was very tired, but I needed to find out kind of the early part of the story, which is exciting. So I love the way you lay everything out. How did your writing style start, though? Is it a style that you developed on your own? Is it somebody that you liked growing up? How did you come to write the way you do?
well, that's a good question.
And it's very honest, and it seems like the person, you're almost in that person's head as they're thinking, saying things they normally wouldn't say. You know what I'm saying?
I think in order to write, you have to be in everyone's head. You have to, and that's what's interesting. I think it's probably a lot like acting, only you don't have to get up in front of anyone, but you have to, think about what their motivations are, and what their history is, and feel what they're feeling. So there's a certain amount of empathy in it. But this is the first thriller that I've written. I've written other things that are a little more sensitive, and I tried to bring that character development to this story as well.
Are they people that you might have seen in Kendall Square or in Boston, in Cambridge, in different areas around New England, in the city, or even in the suburbs, types of people? Are they, obviously you changed the names to protect the innocent, but are some of the characters personalities that you've run across?
Yeah, a couple of them are. Some of the more diabolical ones are, especially.
So it's isn't that the fun part of writing, to be able to take characters you see in your real life and put it into a book and make it come together?
Right, and it's also really it's like therapy too. I mean, not so much in this book,
Sure.
but in other books, you have your characters in some sort of a conflict, and then they resolve a conflict in a way that maybe you can't do it yourself, and you can do it through your characters, which is neat. So.
How did you come upon what you do? You're a very talented artist. You're a writer, obviously. You've worked with websites in the tech businesses and stuff like that. Did it happen when you grew up? Jenny grew up in Ohio. Is it from your education? Is it from, how did you come to where you are today?
Right.
As a 3-book writer. That's pretty good accomplishment to have 3 books out.
So I used to read a lot when I was a kid,
Yeah.
and as an adult too. But there was always something that I was sort of searching for in a book that I wasn't finding in what I was reading, and there was like something that wanted to be said that wasn't there, and I figured out that it wasn't there because I wanted to say it myself, and so and I'd never really written much. And it was on my birthday 20 years ago
Okay.
that I decided that, okay, I'm going to give myself writing as a present. And I sat down at the computer and I wrote. I didn't even know what I was going to write, and it turned out to be a story about something that happened to me when I was a kid, and it was sort of cathartic, and I'm sure that everybody starts writing this way, and it was really powerful. And it was 2 hours later, I looked up and I thought, what if it's this powerful for me? I should really continue, and I'm pretty sure that my first stories were pretty awful, and I started taking some classes, and it got better, and then I've been in writers groups, and some of those people are here.
I was just going to say that. Was the next thing I
Yeah.
was going to say. No, you belong to a writers group, and the importance of belonging to a writers group. What is the importance of having a writers group? Do you feed off of each other? Do you give each other ideas? How does that work to kind of have peers work with each other?
Oh, it's fantastic because you have a consistent group of people who come and know your work and mark it up for you once a month, and you do the same for them.
Right.
And then you go around and you discuss it, and they say, well, I don't really think that character would do this, and
It sounds like it's a fun support group, though, in a sense.
It is. It's a support group for writers, and it is. It's great.
Does anybody in the audience have a question they'd like to ask Jenny that we could, they were thinking about? Yes, go ahead. I'll repeat it when you say it.
Jenny, how much research did you have to do on biological terrorism, for example, and how did you do that?
The questioner wants to how much research did Jenny do on biological terrorism, I guess you'd call it, pretty much, right?
Right. Not too much, and it doesn't get into real specifics because, thank goodness, the way that it works out, I didn't have to go there. But what I did research is FBI protocol, and I had a conversation with the Public Affairs Department at the DC office of the FBI, who helped me figure out what was, acceptable in terms of their protocol and some of their terminology. So I'm very grateful to them for that.
So it's okay to ask for help when you write a book. I mean, you have the idea, you have the characters, but sometimes to kind of tie things together, we need to ask people outside of our realm, in a sense.
Oh, for sure, and which is why a writers group is great. But that is a very good question. I mean, because when you're writing about something you don't know a lot about, the internet is it's your friend.
Let me ask you this: it's kind of a two-part question. What has inspired you to become the writer you are today, and how has technology helped or not helped for writers today? So you were obviously inspired at some point to write, but then obviously, 20 years ago when you started to write, things weren't like they are today. The instant, the iPhones and the things like that.
Right.
How has it changed writing for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I was at Jane Austen's house maybe 10 years ago,
Nice.
and she wrote at a little desk next to a window with probably a plume, and she couldn't erase stuff and move it around in her computer,
Yeah.
and she just wrote these novels, and I don't know how the hell she did it, honestly, because, I don't know how I'd write without a computer, because,
So it's a helpful tool.
oh, yeah,
definitely.
and spell check, which I could use a little more, but, yeah.
And we kind of did touch on it in the beginning, but I want to get a little more into it. So could you talk a little more about the characters without giving too much away? And how do you come up with the idea of not having too many characters? You want to have a main character, then, sub-characters and things like that. How does that work for you?
Well, okay, so Kylie grew up in Lexington, so there's her parents, and she's having some independence issues from them, and they're very controlling with her. And that's hard for her. And there's an FBI agent that she works with who she kind of befriends, actually. And, they're both sort of lone wolves, and it's kind of nice. And then she has a romantic interest with an encryption expert that she has to hire to get rid of Simon. So...
Again, Simon, if those who just walked in or just tuned in, is the hacker that she befriends.
Yeah,
I guess that's the best way to say it.
I don't know that befriends is the word.
Well, no, but at first,
She hires him.
but at first it
Yeah.
seems like she's a little bit kind of thrown off by him, but she kind of like, they become kind of partners in a way.
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to say.
He builds it for her.
Right.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a question they were wondering about? No, we can just, yes, go ahead, please.
How long did it take you to write this?
So the question is, how long did it take you to write this? And even going further, go ahead.
Yeah, from beginning to end.
Yeah, from beginning to end. So from the first idea of the actual story to the, or pen to paper, but it was actually more like typing than pen
Right.
to paper.
So there was version 1 that was about 3 years in the making. And then there was, and I started sending it out a little bit, and I found out that I needed to add about 20,000 more words to it. And so I tried to figure out ways of beefing up the story, and I invented some more characters. So it probably, and then with edits and re-edits on those edits, it probably took me 5 years altogether.
That's a long time for a book, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it, let me ask you a question. So is it a long time because the story was developing in that time period, or does it take that long to take the idea and put it into a book? How does that work? If you follow what I'm saying, I mean, you have the idea, you start writing and writing and writing, and do you put a deadline on it, or do you just kind of come and go with the writing? How does?
Well, this is one place where a writer's group is really great, because you have a commitment. Every month you have to come up with something.
Okay, so you do have a deadline in a sense with your writer's
and
group.
it keeps and it keeps the story moving. And so when I'm writing, I have a work ethic, and I make myself write every single day. And
So it's like a musician playing the piano every day,
Yeah.
playing an instrument kind of thing.
you have to.
Yes.
Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. And I mean, I think there's writers that probably write, like way into the night, once a week or something, but that's not me. I mean, I'm just very disciplined about it. And I used to get up, and before I started working, I would write at least for an hour and a half every day. So
Now, you mentioned Jane Austen earlier on. Are there any writers that have influenced your style, or do you feel like you kind of your own uniqueness to what you do? Because you become a millennial in this book, and you're not a millennial.
No,
so,
I'm not.
So
No.
where do you get the style for your writing, and who are some of the people, or are there any people that really, or is it your writer's workshop?
No,
people?
it's just, it's the millennial part is just a character I came up with. And living in Kendall Square, there's so many millennials, and you kind of
You become them after a while. Then.
Yeah, no, you just observe them, and so that's part of it. But one writer who I really love his work is Ray Daniels, and he writes tech thrillers in Boston, the Tucker series in particular, and I was lucky enough to get him to write a little blurb for my cover, and I just love his writing. And I think he makes Boston a very interesting character in his stories, and that's something that I wanted to do in this book too, because I've lived in Boston and I've lived in Cambridge, and those places were very alive to me, and I tried to make them very vibrant in the book. So that was sort of inspired by Ray as well.
We're winding down, but I want to ask you this before we do go, Jenny, is with OMG, it's familiar to people that live around Boston, but at the same time, you can identify even if you're from a different city.
Right.
So you make the character and characters kind of, you can plop it down in any coffee shop, in any kind of.
Well, that's true, but I think that, there's some parts of the country that it would be more identifiable.
Sure.
Than
Definitely.
others.
Right.
Maybe Silicon Valley, but.
But somebody reading, I guess what I'm saying, somebody reading the book outside of the Boston area can kind of identify with the characters just by the story you're telling.
Right, and that's the thing. It's as much about the characters as it is about the technology. I mean, the technology is like this. It's more about the characters and their story, and Kylie's journey to finding her resolution to her issues is the main thing in the story.
And it makes it a more exciting experience that it is familiar places for those of us that are here at the Opus in Salem. And that's it for the show. So anything else you want to say as we wind down about OMG? Yes, please. We have another question from the
When
audience.
and how did you find out you were writing a novel?
Well, okay, I wrote the first chapter, which was called Jolt, which was about Simon, and I didn't know it was the first chapter. And then, as I said, I'm in a writer's group. So it was a chapter that grew, and I'm better at writing novels than I am at short stories. You know, it wasn't really a short story. It was the beginning of something, and I knew it. I didn't know what. You know, I sort of write what's in my headlights. I don't have. Some writers have a master plan. They have an index. You know, like an outline for everything, and I don't do that. So, but it's nice to be surprised, and hopefully the reader is surprised. Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions that we're going to mingle around afterwards? But yeah, there's in the way in the back. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, in that context, do you find your characters doing things you don't expect them to do?
The question is, do you find your characters doing things you don't expect them to do?
Oh, absolutely. I was shocked at their behavior. I mean, no. You know?
Even you were shocked.
Even I was shocked, right? So, are you kidding me? You know, where did that come from? So, and if you read it, you'll see what I'm talking about. But I take no responsibility for that whatsoever.
You have another question? I saw another question.
Is there a writer's group for non-fiction writers, opposed to fiction writers?
Oh, yeah. In fact, there was...
Were you saying there's writers' workshops for nonfiction writers? Is what the question was?
Yeah, my writers group had a nonfiction writer in it. So you just have to find a group that will, you know, take you.
Well, that's a great question. So there's different types of writers groups.
Right.
So it's almost like networking groups. If you kind of got to feel the flow of the writers. If you're being criticized in ways you don't feel comfortable with, or just I don't know, it's like friends. I like making friends in a way.
Yeah.
I would think.
Well, I'll tell you, when I lived in Madison, I started a writers group at Barnes and Noble, and they had this great big huge table, and I put a poster up in the store, and I couldn't believe it. There were like 25 people that showed up for the first time, and everybody went around and read stuff, and this one woman, read her story, and she got a lot of criticism on it, and she fled in tears.
Oh wow.
And that's the thing, if you're going to improve, you've got to have a thick skin, and you've got to know that people want to help you, and you can't take everything as gospel, but you have to know that people want to help your writing get better.
It's along the lines of a question I did want to ask you. Obviously, you gotten feedback from your writers group. At the launch party, you're getting some really nice positive feedback from people. What is it like to get these wonderful accolades for what you've accomplished here? When people, what does it feel like when somebody... that's what you're hoping for, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's good. Yeah.
It's your time to shine.
Yeah,
right?
No, it's fun. I mean, why not, right?
Right. I mean, you put something out there, obviously you want to get a positive response from it.
Right.
Any other questions tease them with about the book, other than what we have spoken about, that you want to leave them with? To somebody who has not yet opened the book yet.
Oh, my goodness. What can I tease them with? Well, the whole story is pretty, it evolves in all sorts of wild ways. But Kylie's relationship with Misha, I think, is particularly interesting. So
Okay.
there's kind of a little bit of a romance in there.
So there's a romance in there. I like
A
that.
little bit of a romance.
Okay, so we got murder, romance.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we have it.
Thank you, James.
Thank you for inviting me to talk with you today.
Yeah.
All right.